Hi guys, welcome back to the Home and Homestead. If you're new, I'm Rebecca. Today we're going to be doing some pressure canning. We're going to can some black beans, and we're going to prepare the dried black beans two different ways. We're going to do a short soak method and a long soak method. We'll also be using two different pressure canner styles. I'll be using my Presto Digital Pressure Canner as well as a stovetop style pressure canner. So let's head over to the kitchen and I'll show you how to prepare black beans in a couple of different ways in order to pressure can them, so we have some great black beans to store in the pantry. So the first method that we're going to do is the short soak or quick soak method. And what that means is you'll take some dry beans and you'll rinse them off and drain them, and then what we're going to do is boil them for 2 minutes, shut the water off, and allow them to soak for an hour. So in this bowl I have about 3 cups or about 1 pound of black beans, and then I washed and rinsed them and drained them. And in this Dutch oven I have some water that I'm bringing to a boil. So I'll just add these black beans into here. And we'll bring these black beans up to a boil and allow them to boil for 2 minutes. Alright, so these black beans have been boiling for about 2 minutes. So what I'm going to do is turn off the heat, we'll add a cover, and just remove that pot from the heat. We're going to allow those beans to soak for 1 hour. Then we can move on to the next step, which we can also use as the next step for our long soak method. So in this pot I have our short soak black beans. These have boiled for 2 minutes and now they're doing a 1 hour soak. In this bowl I have my long soak black beans. So yesterday I took about 6 cups or 2 pounds of black beans and I washed and rinsed them and drained them and put the beans into this mixing bowl. And I covered them with a nice amount of water, about 3 to 4 inches above the level of the dried beans. And now today, 8 to 12 hours later, those beans have absorbed all of that water and have plumped up nicely. And what I did was, when I started to prepare the short soak black beans here, I just added a thin layer of water on top to see if these beans would absorb any more water while we waited for the short soak beans to be finished. So once the short soak black beans have finished the 1 hour soak, we'll continue with the next step of preparing our dried black beans for pressure canning. Now that the short soak black beans or quick soak method has finished, we can drain both of these vessels and move on to the next step. So now in this stock pot I had this about half filled with water and it was nice and boiling, and I added all of those prepared black beans. So they are in here, and what we're going to do is boil these black beans, both the quick soak and the long soak, for about a half hour. Then we'll drain them and put them into jars and get them ready for the canner. Again, I'll be using my Presto Digital Pressure Canner as well as my stovetop style pressure canner. So I'll just replace the lid and we'll allow these beans to boil for 30 minutes. While the black beans are doing the final step of preparation, we can get our pressure canners going. So first I'll get my Presto Digital Pressure Canner set up and going, and we can get the jars that I'll be using heated within the canner as well. I'll be doing 1/2 pint regular mouth jars in here today for the black beans, or this canner holds 10 regular mouth 1/2 pint jars, 8 regular mouth pint jars, or 5 regular mouth quart jars. If you're going to use the wide mouth style canning jars, you can fit 14 1/2 pint jars because they're a kind of shorter, wider jar, and you would just do a double layer of stagger stacking within the canner, or you could do 7 wide mouth pint jars or 4 wide mouth quart jars. Whichever size jar you prefer to do for your beans, you do that. That's the capacity of this particular canner. So I'll be doing 1/2 pint jars, so I will use 10 of them and get them prepared and warmed in the pressure canner here. So inside of the canner there is a liner pan, and I have it filled with about 3 quarts of water or to the bottom line, and there's also the jar tray which is on the bottom of the liner pan. So I'll plug in the canner because it is electric, and right away on the screen it is showing pressure can. If I turn this little knob, it shows boiling water can. We're going to be doing pressure can, so I'll press enter, and here we're going to put the processing time. Half pint jars and pint jars for black beans is 75 minutes. For quart jars is 90 minutes. So I'll set this to 75 minutes. Now it is telling me to insert jars. On the screen it says it right here. So we can just add the jars in here. Now I just filled the half pint jars about halfway with water. Whichever jars you're choosing to use, you will do the same. Fill them about halfway up with water. I'm putting them right on that jar rack that comes with the canner, which is on the bottom of this liner pan. So now we'll just add the lid. It says install, remove in this little U shape, and we'll turn it to locked. We're going to take off this regulator cap. We'll just set that off to the side. I'm just going to lower the sensor arm and turn this little green latch here. Now I can press the play button. And the pressure canner says warm and is currently warming our canning jars. So this is preparing the jars so they'll be nice and warm for when we put our warm black beans in later for pressure canning. The pressure canner has finished the warm jar cycle and it beeped twice, and now on the bottom it says fill jars, so we can remove the lid and dump out that water that we put inside of each of the jars and fill the jars with whatever we are planning to pressure can. To remove the lid, we'll just turn this green latch and move the sensor arm back, and we'll just simply move the lid over to remove and lift off. Now we can take the warmed jars out of the canner here. Now the black beans have finished their 30-minute boil time on the stock pot, so we can drain those beans and fill these half-pint jars. In this large 8-quart bowl, I have about half of the prepared black beans. So now we're just going to fill our half-pint jars here. They're nice and warm. I like to fill the jars about 3/4 way full. Then to each of these half-pint jars, we're going to put a 1/4 teaspoon of canning salt. The salt is not for preservation, it's simply for a taste. If you prefer less salt, you could certainly lower that or leave it out. I do feel that the beans do taste better with a little bit of salt when you're pressure canning. Now I have 2 kettles that I will get boiling with some water, and we'll top all these jars up to a 1-inch headspace before we get them into the canner. So here I have 1 kettle ready to go with some water. So I'm just going to fill the jars to about a 1-inch headspace. You can either use your headspace measuring tool, which has a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, 1 inch. And you would just put it on the edge of the jar, or usually it's to the bottom of the threads on the side of a jar. Now on the other end of that headspace measuring tool is a bubble removing tool. So you just use that and slide it down the sides and in the middle. That just helps to remove any air bubbles that might be in between the beans. You may find after doing this you may have to add a little more water in order to get that 1-inch headspace. Next we'll just take a paper towel moistened with water and we'll wipe off the rim and the side threads of the jars. Then we can place the lid, followed by the ring, onto the jar and just make it finger tight. And now we can get these half-pint jars loaded into our digital pressure canner. So again, this can hold 10 regular mouth half-pint jars, which is what I have here. And I will mention that there is a minimum number of jars you should have in this pressure canner or water bath canner if you're using that function. So if you're going to do some small batch canning, this digital canner works really well. But the minimum is 2 quart jars, 4 pint jars, or 8 half-pint jars. All right, so we have our jars all loaded in here. So now we're going to place that lid back onto the canner. So again, install and locked. Then we'll move that sensor arm down and turn the green latch. We're going to leave that regulator off until the machine tells us to put that on. And we're going to press the play button. Now the canner says heat, and it's heating up the canner till it gets to the desired temperature and starts to release that pressure. And when it is ready, it'll tell us when to put this regulator cap on. Then it will begin processing our black beans. In the meantime, I can get my stovetop pressure canner going and the jars filled with the black beans that are going to be going into the stovetop pressure canner. So now I have my stovetop pressure canner heating off to the side here on a separate burner. And I have some pint jars here that I have heated and cleaned. You can do that whichever way you prefer. You could use a stock pot with some warm water and just heat them in the water and dump them out, or you can run them through your dishwasher on a quick cycle. Either way, you want your jars to be nice and warm and clean. So here I have the remainder of the black beans that we prepared together. And again, I like to fill the jars about 3/4 way full. Now my stovetop style pressure canner has a 18 pint jar capacity. So it has 2 jar racks. One will go on the bottom and the other will go in between the jars to make a double layer within the canner in order to do 18 pint jars. But you can use your manufacturer's recommendation and capacity for whatever pressure canner you have at home too. Now for pint jars, we're going to add a 1/2 teaspoon of salt per canning jar. So this is canning salt again. We'll do a 1/2 teaspoon each jar. I have a couple of electric kettles going with some hot water, so let me fill these jars up to our 1-inch headspace. So again, I'll take the bubble removal tool and just slide this around the sides and throughout the middle, just to help remove any air bubbles that may have been between the beans here. Now if we need to add a little more water to fill these jars, we can in order to get that 1-inch headspace. Now we can just use a moistened paper towel again. Just wipe the rim and the side threads. So just help to ensure a nice seal on your jars. Then we'll place the lid, followed by the ring, just finger tight onto all of our jars here. Now we can get these jars into our stovetop pressure canner. So here I have my stovetop pressure canner on a side burner here, and it has been heating up nicely and it's ready to go. I have the amount of water that the manufacturer says for this model of pressure canner, as well as a jar rack on the bottom. So just be sure to add the amount of water that your manufacturer tells you for your style pressure canner. And while it's been heating, I just have the lid on here to help keep the heat and steam within the canner. Now we can load the canner with our jars here. The maximum capacity for my stovetop pressure canner is 18, so you can do 9 jars per level. So there'll be a jar rack on the bottom, and you put another jar rack on top to make 2 layers of jars. 1 layer of jars. I'll add the second jar rack here. And I have 13 pint jars filled with the black beans today. Now we'll get the top layer of jars into the pressure canner. And now we'll get the lid on. So just place the pressure canner lid, and there's little arrows on the side. You just line them up You're going to press down and slide it over and lock into place so that these black handles line up. Now what we're going to watch for is for this little stem here to release steam consistently. And once the steam has been releasing consistently for 10 minutes, then we can add our weight. So this is a weight gauge style pressure canner. So I will be using a 10 PSI gauge. You can also use a dial style pressure canner. So here I have a little chart. Based on your altitude and feet on the far left, you would use either a weighted gauge or the dial gauge reading of the various columns, all based on your altitude. Now the digital pressure canner has been venting out of the back, and it says vent on the screen, and a 10-minute timer has started. Once that timer goes down and it beeps for us, then we will know that we can move on to the next step, which will be to put the regulator on, and the processing time will begin for our black beans. Now the pressure canner has started beeping and it says put regulator on. So I'm going to place the regulator on and back here. Now that we have placed the regulator cap and set it to can, I press enter, and now the pressure canner is going to process the black beans at the initial time that we set at the beginning of 75 minutes for pint jars or 90 minutes for quart jars. And we'll come back once this process is finished. Alright, so the stovetop pressure canner has been releasing steam out of this stem for about 10 minutes now. It's really hard to pick up on camera, but you can see kind of the bubbles dripping onto the top of the lid. So now I can place my 10 PSI weighted gauge onto the stem. And now once inside of that pressure canner builds up to that PSI that I've set by my weight, this little red tab here will pop up. And once that red tab pops up, we know that it's reached the 10 PSI. There we are. And now I can begin the processing time. So these are pint jars of black beans, so it'll be 75 minutes. We'll come back once the processing time has finished. The Presto Digital Pressure Canner has finished the processing time, and now it has gone into the cooling phase. So the screen says cool, and there's a snowflake, and there's a little status bar on the bottom. This phase usually takes about an hour and a half, and a 10-minute timer will show up during the last 10 minutes. We'll come back when this phase is finishing up. Alright, now the processing time on the stovetop pressure canner has finished as well. So now I'm going to turn this burner off. And now we're going to allow this canner to cool down. So what I'll be looking for is for the pressure to slowly release as it cools, and eventually this little red tab here will be flush with this handle. Then I'll be able to safely remove that weighted gauge there, and I can open the canner and remove the lid. So I'll wait until the pressure is released as the stovetop pressure canner continues to cool. Now the digital pressure canner is just finishing up its cooling phase. It started the 10-minute countdown, and the little pressure valve here has dropped in this level with the handle there. So now once this timer finishes, has 8 minutes left, I'll be able to open the lid and we can remove our pressure canned black beans. Now the digital pressure canner has finished the cool down phase, so everything is finished, and it says done with a little check mark here. So all you do is hold down the X for 3 seconds, and now we're right back to that first screen that we started at. So now what I'm going to do is just turn this green gauge and open the sensor arm. We can lift off this lid. We can get our pressure canned black beans out of the digital pressure canner. Just off to the right here, I have a dish drying pad, and that's where I like to put my canned items onto for their cooling and sealing. So I'll just place these half pint jars onto the cooling and sealing area here and allow the cans to seal. We'll hear that little ping as the pressure canned black beans in these canning jars seal up. After about 12 to 24 hours, we can double check, make sure everything's sealed nicely, and get them onto our canning pantry shelf. Now our stovetop pressure canner has finished cooling down. The little red tab is lowered and it's level with the handle, so now I can safely remove the weight gauge and remove the lid here. So we're just going to turn it. lift it up and then hold it away from you. Now we can remove our pressure canned black beans from our stovetop pressure canner. All right, here we have our pressure canned black beans. And the half pint jars on the left, I processed in my Presto Digital Pressure Canner, and I did 10 half pints. And pint jars to the right, I did 13 in my stovetop pressure canner. And for the preparation of these dry black beans for pressure canning, I did both the short soak and long soak methods. So as you can see, there's a number of different ways that you can pressure can black beans. You can do large batches or small batches. You can use an electric pressure canner, a stovetop pressure canner, and I really enjoy having the options when doing canning projects, because especially with the Presto Digital Canner, you can do water bath canning or pressure canning, and it frees up my stovetop so I could do other projects or cook dinner or whatever it may be. And that pressure canner is just off to the side doing its own thing, and the screen prompts are very helpful. So if you are intimidated about the thought of pressure canning, or if you already are a canner and you're looking for another appliance to add to your kitchen to maybe free up your stovetop when you're doing some canning projects, this is a really great product, and I'm glad that I have this for doing some food preservation projects. So if you'd like some more ideas or inspiration on other canning recipes or things that you can preserve, I do have a food preservation playlist, as well as various water bath canning and pressure canning playlists, so be sure to check those out. And if you're new to the channel or haven't done so yet, I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe. So please be sure to hit that subscribe button below if you haven't done so yet, and continue to watch my channel, The Home and Homestead, for some more homemade, homegrown, and home-style inspiration. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me while we did this pressure canning project of black beans using the short soak and long soak methods, and I hope that you're having a wonderful day. See you next time. Take care.